Guys, please like and subscribe and share this video with your friends and family. Also, please tell me from where you're watching. Thanks. I was 19 when I first got the house to myself for an entire weekend. My parents had planned a quick getaway, and I was both thrilled and slightly apprehensive. It wasn't the first time I had been home alone, but it was the first time I had the whole house to myself for more than just a couple of hours. My friends had all left town, so it was just me, my thoughts, and the silence of the house. The moment they left, I locked the front door behind them. There was something oddly satisfying about hearing the click of the lock and feeling the house settle into itself. Their car rumbled out of the driveway, and I stood at the door for a second, listening to the sound of the engine fading down the street. For the first time in a long while, the house was completely still, and the absence of voices and footsteps in the hallway felt peaceful. For a while, I was excited about the freedom. I turned on some music, grabbed a snack, and flopped onto the couch. No one to tell me to do anything, no one to disturb me. I could do whatever I wanted, watch movies, eat junk food, go to bed whenever I felt like it. I felt like the whole weekend was mine to waste, and I relished that thought. But as the hours passed, something started to change. That sense of freedom quickly shifted into something else. I became hyper-aware of the silence. The house felt bigger somehow, more empty. The small noises, the creaks and groans of the old wood, suddenly seemed louder, more pronounced. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy. I found myself checking the locks on the doors more often than I probably should have. It was like my brain was on high alert even though there was no real reason to feel that way. I tried to convince myself I was just being paranoid, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The house was old, the floors creaked with every step, the hallways stretched on forever, and the rooms always seemed to have shadows lurking in the corners even when the lights were on. That's just how old houses are, right? But the longer I stayed, the more those shadows felt like something else, like something or someone was hiding in them, just out of sight. By the time it hit midnight, the house was silent except for the occasional rustle of the wind outside. I was sitting on the couch, mindlessly scrolling through my phone, when I heard it. A loud bang from upstairs. It was sharp and sudden, cutting through the stillness of the house. My heart leapt into my throat and I froze. At first I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling, but deep down I knew it wasn't. It was too loud, too distinct. The sound seemed to reverberate through the house and I felt a chill race down my spine. My stomach dropped. I stood up slowly, not sure if I was even breathing. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. My thoughts were racing. Should I call my parents? But that felt ridiculous, right? I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen. My hands were shaking and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Every step felt heavier than the last as I slowly made my way toward the stairs. The upstairs hallway was eerily quiet. The air felt thick, like it was holding its breath. The faint smell of dust and old wood filled my nostrils as I walked through the dark hallway, my flashlight flicking across the walls. I checked each room one by one. Nothing. Just the quiet of an empty house. The air felt thick with the silence, and I could hear the sound of my own breathing. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just my imagination running wild. But then, as I was about to leave my parents' room, I heard it again. A faint whisper. My body went cold. I turned around quickly, the flashlight shaking in my hand as I scanned the hallway. But there was no one. No one in the shadows. Just the stretch of darkness, a hallway that seemed to go on forever. I stood frozen for a few seconds, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe it was the wind, or maybe the house was just old. But no matter how hard I tried to dismiss it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I decided to lock the door behind me when I went back downstairs, just to feel a little safer. But when I reached the bottom of the stairs, something made my blood run cold. The front door, which I knew I had locked, was slightly ajar. My stomach twisted. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to piece together what had happened. Could I have forgotten to lock it? No, I was sure I had. I remembered doing it. It didn't make sense. The door shouldn't have been open. I walked toward it slowly, almost unwillingly, my feet heavy with every step. I reached for the doorknob, and when I touched it, the coldness of the metal sent a jolt through me. I closed it quickly and locked it again, but the unease didn't go away. In fact, it only seemed to grow stronger. Something wasn't right. I went back to the couch and tried to distract myself, but the quiet was oppressive now. Every little sound, every tiny noise seemed amplified. The faint rustling of the curtains, the creak of a floorboard. It was like the house was alive, breathing with me, waiting for something. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, but it didn't last long. I woke up to the unmistakable sound of the front door opening again. This time, the door wasn't just slightly ajar, it was wide open, and standing in the doorway was a figure, a tall man. His face was hidden in the shadows, his features obscured by the darkness. I froze. My heart raced and my breath caught in my throat. Was I dreaming? Was this some sort of sick joke? No, this was real. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, unable to move. My mind raced. How could this be happening? I wanted to scream, but I couldn't make a sound. I barely managed to whisper, "Who are you?" The man didn't answer. He just stepped forward into the house, his movements slow and deliberate. The door creaked as he crossed the threshold, and his shadow seemed to stretch and distort, growing taller as it crossed the floor. Panic shot through me. My instincts kicked in and I bolted. I ran toward the back door, my mind scrambling for a plan, for a way out. I was almost there when the lights flickered. Then, everything went dark. The power had gone out. I stumbled in the pitch-black house, panic surging as I reached out for anything that could guide me. My fingers brushed against the cool, smooth surface of the walls. I could hear him, his footsteps just behind me, slow and steady, getting closer. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers trembling. The screen flickered to life as I managed to unlock it and dial 911. "Someone's in my house," I whispered, the words barely leaving my lips. The operator's voice was calm, soothing, almost too calm. "Stay on the line, help is on the way." But then, everything went silent. The footsteps stopped. My heart pounded in my ears as I stood there, listening. I turned around, desperately trying to see into the dark corners of the room, but there was no one. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice shaking. I waited for some response, but the house stayed empty. I crept toward the front door, which was now closed and locked. No sign of the man, no trace of anyone. My mind raced. Was I imagining all of this? Was I losing my grip on reality? But then, I saw it. A faint smear of dirt on the floor, leading from the door to the living room. I couldn't explain it. The cops arrived minutes later, but they found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no fingerprints. Just the faint dirt smear that seemed to lead nowhere. The house was still. I never stayed alone in that house again. My parents came back the next day, and I told them everything. They didn't believe me, of course. They chalked it up to stress or my mind playing tricks. But I know what I felt. Every time I walked through that door, I could still feel it. The unease, the quiet weight of something watching me from the shadows. I don't know if it was a real intruder or if my mind just got the best of me that night. But I do know one thing for sure. When you're alone in the house at night, every little sound, every shadow feels different. And sometimes, you don't want to know what's lurking just out of sight. I've always been the type to brush off spooky stories. You know the ones. Tales of things that go bump in the night or mysterious creatures lurking just outside of sight. I'd always laugh at them, convincing myself they were just that, stories, meant to entertain and nothing more. I was the first to dismiss any hint of fear, thinking I was above all that. But that all changed the summer we went camping. It started like any other trip. It was supposed to be simple, just me, my best friend T, and 4 other girls. We were heading out for M's birthday, a weekend escape into the woods. M's family owned a huge, secluded piece of land miles from the nearest road or neighbor. The kind of place where the silence is so thick you can feel it pressing against your ears. We had the entire place to ourselves, just the trees, the animals, and us. A perfect setting to escape everything for a while, disconnect, and just enjoy being out in nature. At first, everything was as perfect as we'd hoped. We set up our tent, got the fire going, and spent the evening laughing, roasting marshmallows, and telling stories. The air was warm and smelled like pine, the crackling of the fire providing a steady rhythm to our chatter. It felt like one of those carefree nights you dream about, when life is simple and nothing seems wrong. We were all joking around, tossing out absurd stories and teasing each other, the kind of evening where the world outside felt far away, and we had no worries, no cares. But then, as night fell deeper into the woods, something started to feel off. It wasn't anything specific at first, just a subtle shift. Something that made the air feel heavier, thicker, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. T and I were the first to notice. We decided to stay up later than the others. The rest of the girls were still inside the tent, laughing and joking, but T and I felt drawn to the eerie quiet of the forest. It was something calming yet unnerving about it, and we wanted to explore, to feel the solitude of the trees. So, we stepped out into the dark. It wasn't long before we realized just how silent the woods were. Usually, even in the dead of night, the forest is full of sounds, crickets, the rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. But here, there was none of that. Not a single sound. The kind of silence that presses against you, makes you feel like something is watching you, even when you're alone. As we walked along the trail that wound through the trees, our footsteps were the only sound, crunching against the dry leaves underfoot. There was a stillness to the air, almost like time itself had paused. Then, that's when it happened. We heard it. Footsteps. Heavy footsteps. The sound of something or someone moving through the underbrush behind us. T froze, grabbing my arm so tight it almost hurt. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, her voice shaky. I stopped, straining to listen. There it was again, footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving just behind us, just out of sight. We turned quickly, scanning the shadows with our flashlights, but we couldn't see anything. At first we thought it was one of the other girls, maybe messing around, trying to scare us. But no, it didn't feel like that. The steps were too slow, too purposeful. It wasn't a prank, it was something else. My stomach dropped. This wasn't right. Without saying another word, we turned and ran. Our hearts were pounding in our chests, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. Every footstep felt like it was closing in on us. We didn't stop until we were back at camp, standing in front of the tent, panting. The firelight flickered in the distance, and the other girls were still inside, completely oblivious. We tried to laugh it off, brushing it aside as just an animal or our imagination, but the unease stayed with me. It wasn't the kind of fear you could easily push away. There was something strange in the air, something lingering. We crawled into the tent with the others, trying to get some sleep, but the wind picked up, rustling the leaves outside. That was when the noises started again. The footsteps. This time, they were closer, much closer, circling the tent. My heart skipped a beat. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. This wasn't an animal. No animal moved like this. No animal followed people like this. It felt like someone was out there, watching us. S, who had been the calm one all night, started to cry, and the rest of us sat up, wide-eyed, whispering in a panic, trying to make sense of what was happening. We could hear the footsteps clearly now, slow, deliberate, moving around the perimeter of the tent. Every step was like a cold hammer against our hearts. T and I knew we had to check. We had to know what was out there or we'd never get any rest. I grabbed the flashlight, and the two of us crept toward the flap of the tent. The air outside was cold, too cold, and we could see our breath fogging up in the dim light. Every step felt like we were being watched. I unzipped the flap just enough to peek outside, and that's when I saw him. There, just at the edge of the campfire's flickering light, stood a figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing a mask. A clown mask. It was cracked, twisted, and it seemed to glow faintly in the firelight. The kind of mask that made your stomach drop the second you laid eyes on it. The kind of mask you'd see in a horror movie, not real life. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. We just stood there, frozen, staring at him. He didn't move, didn't make a sound. He just stood there looking at us, his head tilting slightly like he was studying us, trying to figure us out. It felt like an eternity. And then, without a word, he turned and disappeared into the dark, walking slowly into the trees. T and I scrambled back into the tent, our hearts racing. Panic took over. I whispered to M, "Call the cops, call them now." But she just shook her head. Her parents were too far away, too out of reach. We couldn't depend on them. The rest of the girls wanted to know what happened, but I couldn't talk. I couldn't form words. My hands were trembling, my mind was racing, and then it came again. The footsteps. Slow, deliberate, moving closer to the tent. We could hear them clearly now, circling us. But this time they weren't just walking, no. They knew exactly where we were. We could hear the zipper jiggling, testing the tent's weakest point, trying to get in. Set, who had been sitting by one of the mesh windows, lifted the flap just a little to look outside. I didn't want her to, but she did it anyway. And there he was, the clown, right outside the window, crouching, staring directly at her through the fabric of the tent. His eyes, hollow and empty, seemed to mock us as if he was enjoying every second of our fear. His mask grinned, twisted and wide, like it was laughing at us. S yanked the flap down so fast I thought it would tear. Her face was pale, her hands shaking. We all huddled together in the middle of the tent, too scared to move, too scared to even breathe. We could hear the footsteps again, dragging something sharp along the tent walls, scraping it with a horrible screech. We couldn't do anything but stay silent, holding our breath. The hours dragged on. It felt like time had stopped. Every time we thought they had gone, they would return, circling, always just out of sight, always too close. I couldn't take it anymore. Grabbing my phone, I dialed 911. My voice was shaking, barely above a whisper. "We're being stalked. Someone's outside the tent." The dispatcher was calm, too calm. She told me to stay on the line, but every second felt like an eternity. Then, just as I started to think we might actually make it through this, we heard it. The men's laughter, deep, mocking, like they were standing right outside, savoring our fear. I told the dispatcher everything, begging them to hurry, and then we heard it. The sound of sirens. At first faint, almost like a dream, but then louder, growing, and just as we thought we might actually be saved, the footsteps stopped. A voice, deep and menacing, whispered through the tent, "We'll be back." And then they were gone. When the police arrived, we were too terrified to move. They searched the woods, but there was nothing. No trace, no sign of anyone ever being there. M's parents came outside, worried, confused, but we couldn't tell them everything. We were too scared to even look them in the eye. We called our parents and begged them to come pick us up. We were done. We didn't care if it was 3 a.m. We needed to leave. We packed up our things as quickly as possible, our hearts still racing, our minds still in a panic. None of us stayed another minute in that forest. I don't think I'll ever go camping again. I was 23 when the park changed everything for me. It wasn't the kind of place you'd think would haunt you, a quiet, almost forgotten patch of green on the edge of town. There wasn't anything particularly special about it, nothing that would make you stop and think, wow, this is a place I'll always remember. It didn't have the beauty or charm of the larger parks. It was just this small, tucked-away place. The benches were always empty, old and weathered, covered with peeling paint. The paths were cracked and uneven, some of them even overgrown in places, as though nature had begun to reclaim it. The fountain, which looked like it hadn't seen a coat of paint in decades, gurgled weakly, its water trickling out in slow, lazy spurts. It wasn't a bad park exactly, just one of those places you'd walk by but never think about stopping at. There was a quiet, almost eerie stillness to it that made you feel like you should keep moving. The kind of place that didn't invite you to stay. But that day, everything changed. That day, it became something else entirely. Something that would stick with me forever. I worked late shifts at a local cafe, so my schedule was all over the place, which gave me a lot of free time during the day. Most people would have probably spent that time resting, catching up on sleep, or getting things done around the house. But I was too restless for that. After a particularly exhausting stretch of shifts, I decided to take a walk through the park. It wasn't a place I ever spent much time in, but I had passed by it plenty of times. I had always noticed it, but never really stopped to think about it. I figured that maybe a walk would help clear my head a little. Things at home had been off for a while. My mom had been acting distant, almost like she was shutting me out, and my dad was hardly ever around. He worked constantly, and when he was home, he was checked out. It felt like my parents were drifting further and further apart, and I was stuck right in the middle, not knowing which way to turn. I couldn't fix anything, couldn't make sense of it all, so I thought a walk in the park might help me think, even just for a couple of hours. But when I stepped into the park, it wasn't like I remembered. The usual sounds that filled the air, the chirping of birds, the laughter of children, the hum of distant traffic, were gone. Everything was silent, not a single sound. The air felt thicker somehow, more oppressive, like the world outside the park was fading away and leaving only the park behind. At first, I thought maybe I was just imagining it. Maybe it was still too early in the morning and people hadn't started coming to the park yet. But the longer I walked, the more I realized something was wrong. The quiet wasn't natural. It felt like something was waiting, something just beyond the edge of my vision. I tried to shake it off, blaming my exhaustion or my nerves, but the feeling stuck with me. The park felt different, more oppressive. Like the trees were watching me, the ground was watching me. That's when I saw him, the man on the bench. He was sitting near the old fountain, his clothes ragged and torn at the edges, his face obscured by a tangle of hair. He was just staring at the water, unmoving. His eyes, though, something about them was off. They seemed hollow, distant, like he wasn't really seeing anything. But his gaze was intense, and it made me uncomfortable. I tried not to stare. I kept walking, my pace quickening a little. I didn't want to make eye contact, but then I heard him, his voice low and rough, muttering something under his breath. I couldn't catch all the words, but enough to make my skin crawl, something about not going back. His words were almost impossible to make out, but there was something in the tone of his voice, something unsettling that sent a chill through me. I tried to ignore it. I quickened my step and kept my head down, hoping he wouldn't notice me. But then the footsteps started. At first they were soft, almost like my imagination was playing tricks on me. But no, they were there, slow, steady, following me. I looked around quickly, but there was no one else. Just the man on the bench, staring into the fountain. I tried to convince myself it wasn't anything. Maybe it was just someone out for a morning walk. Maybe I was just imagining things. But when I started to walk faster, the footsteps matched mine, perfectly. Step by step, it was like someone was walking just behind me, mirroring my every move. I turned a corner. The footsteps kept pace. Another corner, still there. Whoever it was, they weren't in any hurry. They just followed me, slow and deliberate. I felt my heart start to race. My mind was spinning, trying to figure out what was happening, trying to make sense of the situation. Was it the man from the bench? Had he gotten up? Or was it someone else? I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. So I turned around, and there he was. Just a few feet away, his eyes locked onto mine. His expression was wrong. He wasn't smiling, but his lips were stretched thin, his grin more like a grimace. There was nothing friendly about it. His eyes never left mine. I felt like they were boring into me, like he could see everything I was hiding. "Always here, always come here," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "This place, they come here to hide." I didn't understand what he meant, but I knew that whatever it wasn't good. My heart was hammering in my chest, and my legs were suddenly like lead. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to. I just turned and started walking faster. But the footsteps? They were still right behind me, only now they were closer, almost too close, and I could feel my heart pounding in my throat. The park, which had been a quiet retreat just moments ago, now felt like a trap, closing in around me. I didn't know where to go. I ducked down a side path, hoping to lose him in the thicker trees at the back of the park. The air felt cooler here, the shadows longer. Maybe I could get away, maybe I could find an exit. But when I turned a corner, I realized I was no longer in the park I knew. The paths were different, twisted, broken, some of them blocked off with rusted, bent fences. The trees loomed over me, casting long, dark shadows on the ground. But it didn't feel like a natural overgrowth. No, this felt wrong, like the park had been abandoned for years. The air was stale, like something had been left to decay. And that's when I heard it. Low murmurs coming from the shadows, soft, indistinct, like whispers. I couldn't see anyone, but I could feel eyes on me. My pulse quickened. I spun around, searching, but there was nothing. Just the oppressive silence, like the park itself was watching me. My skin prickled, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. I didn't know what to do. My mind was spinning, trying to think, to figure out what was happening. But all I could do was keep walking, faster now, looking for a way out. But no matter how fast I moved, it felt like the park was closing in around me. I couldn't escape it. The feeling of being watched, of something lurking in the shadows, it didn't go away. It only intensified. Eventually, I stumbled into a small clearing. In the center of it was an old pavilion, its wood rotting and windows shattered. It looked like it hadn't been used in years, but there was something about it. Something about the way it seemed to draw me in, even though every part of me told me to stay away. I should have turned around. I should have run, but I couldn't. I couldn't stop myself. I stepped closer. That's when I saw her, a figure standing inside the pavilion. At first it was just a shadow, barely visible, but then she came into focus. She was a woman, her eyes wide open, staring at nothing. Her hands were gripping the old posts of the pavilion like she was trying to hold on to something. But she didn't move. She didn't blink. She was just standing there, frozen, as though waiting for something or someone. I should have left. Every part of me screamed to turn around and run, but I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot. My heart was racing, my body trembling, but I couldn't move. I couldn't look away from her. And then she whispered, just a soft breath of sound, barely audible. "It's too late for all of us." That's when the man from the bench appeared again. He stepped out from the shadows, his grin now even wider, more twisted, his eyes glinting with something darker than before. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice low and filled with a twisted amusement. "No one ever leaves this place." My heart stopped. Panic flooded my chest. I turned to run, but when I looked behind me, the path was gone. The park had changed again. It was no longer the place I had walked into. It had become a maze, a labyrinth, and I was trapped. I don't remember how I made it back home, only that when I did, I felt different. The park was still there, but it was never the same. Every time I passed it, I could feel the pull, the eyes watching me from the shadows, the whispers following me. Things at home didn't get any better either. The distance between my parents only grew. But that park, it broke something in me. It shattered the sense of safety I had, the belief that some places were just meant to be peaceful. That park had become something else, a warning. To this day, I can't walk through parks. I don't trust them. Some places, some things, are meant to be left alone. I was just a kid when it all started. My family had moved into the neighborhood a few months before, and at first everything seemed fine. I remember how fresh the air felt, how the streets seemed so neat, almost like a scene out of an old movie. The houses were perfectly aligned with lawns that looked like they'd been trimmed by the hands of perfectionists. But something about it all felt off. It wasn't a place where people smiled at each other or stopped to chat on the street. Everyone was always in a rush, heads down, eyes forward. It felt like no one really wanted to be there. No one said hello. It wasn't the kind of neighborhood you'd expect to run into anyone who would pause and make small talk. And that feeling, it was like a shadow I couldn't shake off, no matter how many times I tried to ignore it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how eerie the quiet was. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was too still. Almost like the air was too thick, as if it was waiting for something. The The lawns were always trimmed to perfection, the houses impeccably maintained, but there was never any sign of life. No kids playing, no dogs barking. It was like we'd all walked into some strange suburban dream where everything was just a little too perfect. But it wasn't perfect. It didn't feel right. And at the end of the block, there was one house that made everything feel even stranger. It wasn't the biggest house on the block, but it had this air about it, like it was from a different time altogether. The house was tucked away at the farthest corner, surrounded by a high hedge that blocked any view of the backyard. The windows were always tightly shut, no curtains, no signs of life. At first I thought it was because the owners were old, maybe reclusive, but there was something about the way it stood there, silent, like it was waiting for something, that made me uncomfortable. People would walk by, but no one ever spoke about it. No one even acknowledged its presence. It was as if it didn't exist. But the strangest thing, I started noticing the figure. I'll never forget the first time I saw it. It was late one evening as the sky started to turn that dusky blue color, and I was sitting outside on the front porch. I looked down the street, and there it was, just standing there in the window. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was a shadow, or I was just imagining things. But when I looked again, there it was, taller than any person I had ever seen, its shape thin and elongated, almost like it was stretching out of the house to reach us. It didn't move, it didn't wave, it didn't blink. It just stood there, staring. The next night, I saw it again, and the next. It became a nightly thing, this tall, thin figure always in the same window, always standing still. The strange thing was, it never seemed to leave. It wasn't like a person walking by or a shadow that came and went. It was there, watching us from behind the glass, and it didn't blink. I remember staring at it for what felt like forever, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was like the house had eyes, and they were trained on me and on everything around me. I told my sister about it one evening, and she just shrugged it off. "You're imagining things," she said, the way she always did when I told her anything that seemed even slightly strange. But this didn't feel like imagination. I felt it in my gut, the way the house seemed to breathe, almost like it was waiting for something. I could feel its presence. It was like a pressure in the air. Then, one night, everything changed. I was in bed trying to fall asleep, but the usual noises, the ones that old houses make when they settle, kept me awake. You know the ones, creaks, groans, that sound like the house is stretching out, like it's alive. But then came something different. It started soft, a faint scratching sound against the door, so quiet that I almost dismissed it as the wind or a tree branch. But it wasn't the wind. It grew louder. It wasn't a tap. It wasn't a knock. It was scratching, a clawing, like something was trying to force its way into the room. I felt my breath catch in my throat. I froze. I didn't know what to do. My sister heard it too, and we both crept toward the door, holding our breath, pressing our ears to the wood. The sound was growing louder, more desperate. It was like something was trying to get in, like it couldn't be stopped. Then, the door handle rattled, slowly at first like something was testing it, and then more urgently, like it was trying to break through. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. "Mom!" I screamed, but there was no response. I could hear her faintly snoring in the next room, completely unaware of what was happening right outside our door. My sister and I stood there in the dark, frozen, too terrified to move. We could feel the cold air creeping in from the hallway, and then, just like that, the scratching stopped. The silence that followed wasn't the kind of silence that comforts you. It was the kind that makes your skin crawl. It felt like something was waiting, watching. But we didn't sleep that night. I don't think either of us did. We just lay there staring at the ceiling, listening for anything that would give us an explanation. But there was nothing. The house was quiet again, like nothing had happened. The next morning, things felt normal again, too normal. Everything was in place, but deep down, I knew something had shifted. Something had been unleashed. It wasn't until a few days later that we found out what had really been going on. My mom was talking to one of the neighbors, a woman who lived a few houses down, when she came inside looking a little shaken. "That old house?" the neighbor said, her voice barely above a whisper. No one's lived there for years. It's been abandoned for, well, no one really knows. Some people say the owners disappeared, just vanished one day. No one knows why. Others say the house made them lose their minds. It's always been strange. A lot of people think the house is cursed. My stomach dropped. The house that had been watching us, the one that felt so wrong, was empty? Abandoned for years? I couldn't believe it. How could that be possible? How could a house that had been empty for so long make us feel like it was alive? But that wasn't the worst part. The whispers started not long after. At first, I thought I was just hearing things, but then I realized my sister was hearing them too. Soft voices drifting in from nowhere. Just a whisper at first, then growing louder. The voices weren't clear, but they were definitely there, like a conversation happening somewhere in the distance, but there was no one around. The whispers always seemed to come from the direction of that house. They were so faint, like they were being carried on the wind, but they were constant. The sound of hushed voices in the dead of night, like they were speaking just out of reach, but always there, always lingering. One night, we decided we were going to find out once and for all what was really going on with that house. My sister and I waited until it was completely dark, then sneaked out the back door as quietly as we could. The air outside was cold, and the night was still, making everything feel even more oppressive, like something was holding its breath. We crept through the rows of houses, past the neatly trimmed lawns, until we reached the old house at the end of the street. The house looked even worse up close, more ominous. The front door was cracked open, just wide enough to let a sliver of light spill out, casting a faint glow across the overgrown porch. We stepped inside and the floorboards creaked under our feet. The air was thick with the smell of mold and decay, like the house hadn't been opened in years. Papers were scattered across the floor, their edges curling with age. There were no pictures on the walls, no signs of life, just empty spaces where memories used to be. And then we saw it. In the back of the house, a door was slightly ajar. We both froze, exchanging a glance. Neither of us spoke, but we knew what we had to do. Slowly, I crept forward, pressing my ear to the door. I pushed it open just enough to peek inside. That's when I saw it. The same figure I'd seen in the window, but this time, it wasn't facing us. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, like it was listening to something we couldn't hear. Then, without warning, it turned, slowly. Its eyes were glowing, pale, flickering like they were lit from within. I screamed. My sister grabbed my hand, pulling me away. We ran as fast as we could, not looking back until we were safely back in our yard, hearts racing. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We both knew what we'd seen. We never went back to that house. I've always been an outsider. It's one of those things that just kind of sticks with you, you know? High school was never a place where I felt at home. It was more like an endless stretch of trying to figure out where I belonged. Always standing at the edges, watching everyone else find their place while I stumbled through, trying to find something, anything to grab onto. I spent most of those years feeling like I was floating, caught between groups, never really fitting in. Then, in my sophomore year, something shifted. I stumbled into a group of kids who seemed to embrace everything I'd secretly been craving for so long. They wore black, had piercings, and listened to music that most people wouldn't even dare to touch. It was the summer of 2010, and it felt like I was falling into something deeper, darker, and more real than anything else I had ever known. Among all of them, Alex stood out. He wasn't like the others. He had this quiet intensity about him, the kind that made you stop and think. You couldn't tell if he was just different or if there was something a lot more complicated going on beneath the surface. Alex had grown up in foster care, moved from one house to another, always drifting. He didn't have roots anywhere. At first, I didn't know much about him, but there was something magnetic about him. It wasn't just his dark, sarcastic humor that drew me in, it was the way he looked at the world, like he could see through all the walls I had built around myself, like he understood that emptiness that I thought was mine alone. Then there was Jake. Jake had a reputation, a big one. People whispered about him, saying he was into some seriously messed up stuff. But honestly, I wasn't about to judge him for it. We all had our demons. I had mine, Jake had his. The difference was that Jake didn't hide his. In a world where most people wore masks, pretending to be someone they weren't, Jake was refreshingly honest about his darkness, but he didn't try to be someone else. And maybe that's what made him real. He didn't pretend, and that made him more honest than most people I knew. It wasn't long before the three of us were inseparable. We were just a few lost souls trying to find some meaning in a world that seemed to have no place for us. Late nights, bad decisions, empty bottles, and way too much laughing. It didn't matter that we weren't going anywhere. We had each other, and for a while, that was enough. At first, it wasn't anything too crazy. We made trouble, sure. Some petty thefts, a prank here and there, some parties that turned into total messes. But it wasn't dangerous, not yet. We weren't hurting anyone, at least not in any way that seemed serious. We were just kids trying to survive, trying to numb the pain of feeling like we didn't belong in this world. We made our own fun, even if it wasn't exactly the healthiest kind of fun. But we didn't care. It felt like we were just doing what we could to get by in a world that didn't really give a damn about us. Then came that one night, the night everything changed. It was Halloween my senior year. Alex decided to throw a party at his place. Now, here's the thing. I knew something was off the moment I arrived. Alex's house wasn't like the others. It was in one of those new developments with houses that looked like they belonged in a catalog. Everything was pristine, manicured, and picture perfect. That wasn't Alex. He was always the outsider, the one who didn't fit the mold. But there I was, standing in front of this perfect house in a perfect neighborhood, and for a second I was just confused. But I didn't question it. I wasn't there to think about anything. I was there to drink, to forget, to numb myself for a few hours and let the world slip away. At first, everything seemed normal. The music was loud, drinks were flowing, and people were scattered around, talking, laughing, being loud, but then Alex pulled me, Jake, and a few others aside. He said he had something to show us. Naturally, we thought it was going to be some kind of crazy dare, or maybe a game of truth or dare turned wild. Instead, he led us down into the basement. The basement was dark, a little musty, and filled with old, ragged furniture that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. It was the kind of place that screamed abandonment. It wasn't the kind of setting you'd expect for a party, but I wasn't thinking much about it at the time. It was the least of my worries. But then Alex opened the door to that closet. That's when everything changed. When I saw what was inside, I felt the blood drain from my face. There, tied up and gagged, was a woman. Her clothes were torn, and she looked fragile, almost like she hadn't eaten in days. But it wasn't her body that made everything inside me freeze. It was her eyes. I knew her. Her name was Sarah. She was a local homeless woman who wandered the streets, talking to herself, collecting cans. Everyone knew her, but no one really saw her. She was just part of the background noise, like the town had forgotten she even existed. But there she was, tied up in a closet, looking at us with those terrified eyes. I couldn't wrap my head around it. "What the hell, Alex?" I managed to say, but my voice was shaky. I didn't know if I was scared, confused, or just disgusted, but I couldn't take my eyes off her. Alex just grinned, a twisted smile that made my stomach turn. It was like he was enjoying the shock in my voice, like he expected it. Jake stepped forward then, his eyes gleaming with something dark. He didn't hesitate for a second. He grabbed a dart and threw it at her. It hit her in the arm. She screamed, but the gag muffled the sound. My heart was pounding. This couldn't be real. This was just some sick joke, right? But it didn't feel like a joke. It felt wrong. All wrong. "Where did you even get her?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, trying to make sense of what was happening. Alex shrugged, like it was nothing. He explained that he and Jake had somehow convinced Sarah to come over. They offered her drugs, maybe some alcohol, got her high, and then tied her up and locked her in the closet. At that point, I thought maybe it was all just a messed up prank. But I was wrong. So wrong. They dragged her out into the middle of the basement, making her kneel inside a chalk circle that had been drawn on the floor. I could feel my heart pounding harder now, and the air in the room seemed to get thicker. Alex pulled out a needle. He held it up with his calm, almost ceremonial look in his eyes and said, "This is for the king." I didn't know who or what he meant by that, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that he injected her with something, probably heroin, but who knows? It didn't matter. This wasn't a joke anymore. This wasn't a prank. This was something darker, something I wasn't prepared for. Then Jake opened a duffel bag and I saw what was inside. Knives. Lots of knives. That's when I froze. This wasn't a game. This wasn't just sick fun. It was real, and I was stuck in the middle of it. They started cutting her. Slowly, painfully. I could hear her gasps, the muffled cries as she struggled against the ropes. The others in the room? Some were watching with twisted smiles. Others were just frozen, staring in shock. I couldn't move. I was stuck, caught in the moment, paralyzed with fear. My mind was screaming at me to do something, anything, but my body refused to move. And then something happened. A girl, someone I barely knew, whispered in my ear, "I'm calling the cops." I didn't even think. My heart stopped, but I knew I had to act. She hid her phone and dialed 911. The rest of the room was too distracted by the chaos in front of them to notice. I wasn't sure if it was too late or if we could still stop this, but I knew I couldn't just stand there anymore. The girl's voice rang out in the chaos. "Cops are coming!" And that's when everything went nuts. The room exploded into chaos. People scrambled for the door. Alex's older brother, who had been sitting in the corner with a camera, rushed to open it. I stayed in front of Sarah, between her and Alex, refusing to let him hurt her anymore. Then the sirens, loud, blaring, getting closer, cut through the madness. The police arrived, and just like that, the nightmare that had been dragging on forever finally came to an end. I stayed behind to give my statement to the officers while they carried Sarah out, barely conscious. She survived that night, but no one ever saw her again after that. She just disappeared, like she was swallowed by the earth. Alex and Jake were arrested. They were sent to juvie for what they did. The rest of us scattered. I graduated a few months later, but I couldn't shake the image of what I'd seen. I couldn't shake the faces of the people who had stood there, watching it all happen. And then there was the camera footage. The cops got it, of course. It helped them track down everyone who had been at that party, even kids from other schools. But here's the thing that still gets to me: how fast everyone else forgets. They move on. They act like it never happened, but I'll never forget it. I'll never forget Sarah's face, the way her eyes begged for help, the way no one did anything. I'll never forget the people who just watched. I grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where everything felt safe and peaceful, but not so quiet that it gave off that eerie, something's wrong vibe you often hear about in horror movies. It was the usual suburban soundtrack: dogs barking, kids riding bikes, cars zooming by, you know the drill. But there was this one house at the end of our cul-de-sac that always felt off. It wasn't just old, it was really old. The kind of house that seemed to have stories it wasn't ready to tell. And it had a basement that no one ever really talked about. Our house had a basement too, but it was nothing special. Just the usual stuff: furnace, laundry machines, a few boxes of forgotten holiday decorations and things we never used. The kind of basement you forget about until you need something from it, and even then, it's mostly just a place to throw stuff you don't know what to do with. But that house at the end of the street, people avoided it. It wasn't like there were stories about it, at least not ones anyone would openly share, but you could feel it when you walked by. It was like the house was watching you. I can't explain it, but I always felt like it knew I was there, even though nothing ever moved. It was just wrong. As a kid, I'd sneak glances at it whenever I walked by. The old windows were always covered with thick, heavy curtains, making it hard to tell what was inside. But still, something about it tugged at my curiosity. What was down in that basement? Why did no one talk about it? I didn't know, but I wanted to find out. But the real story starts when I was 14. By then, I was a little older, a little bolder, and way more curious than I probably should have been. I'd heard rumors about the house for years, but they were always whispered behind closed doors, so no one was really willing to confirm or deny anything. But the rumors were enough to make you wonder. They said the family who lived there was strange. They never came outside, not really, well, except for one person, a woman who lived there. People said she was different, like unsettlingly different. There was something about the way she moved. It wasn't just how she walked, but the way she seemed to glide, almost as if she were floating. It gave you the chills, made your stomach twist into knots when you saw her. I'd heard stories that her husband had disappeared, but no one would say what had happened to him. Some said he was just gone, others said he had left, but no one ever knew for sure. One evening, I was walking home after a late shift at the local convenience store. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the streetlights had flickered to life, casting an orange glow along the sidewalk. The air was cooler than I expected, and the quiet was almost oppressive. It was a calm, peaceful evening, but something about it felt off. It was one of those moments where everything felt like it was just waiting. As I walked past the house at the end of the cul-de-sac, I saw movement through the basement window. The curtains were drawn, but I could see a faint light flickering from somewhere inside. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but then I froze. It looked like someone was down there, someone moving. I wasn't sure if I was just tired or if my mind was playing tricks on me, but I swear I saw it. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt that old sense of unease creep back into my chest. The kind of feeling you get when something's not right, but you can't put your finger on it. I told myself I was being stupid, that I was just being paranoid, but curiosity got the better of me. I found myself walking up the driveway, slowly, almost against my will, until I was standing right by the basement window. I don't even know why I did it. It was like something was pulling me toward it. I leaned forward, peering through the small gap in the curtains. It was dark inside, but just enough light was coming from the basement for me to see some shapes in the gloom. That's when I heard it, a dragging sound, slow, heavy, like something or someone was dragging something across the floor. The sound was deliberate, almost rhythmic. Then came a low groan, a noise that made my blood run cold. It wasn't human, at least not in any way I could describe. It was more like something wrong. My body stiffened, and I could feel my heart racing. I shouldn't have stayed. I should have walked away. But my feet didn't listen. I couldn't move. It was like I was stuck in place, unable to tear myself away. The next thing I knew, the basement door creaked open, loud in the stillness. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. And then she appeared, the woman. She stepped into the doorway, her back hunched slightly as if some invisible weight was pressing down on her. When she looked up, her eyes were dark, hollow, empty. I don't know how to explain it, but there was nothing in them. No soul, no life, just darkness. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe for a second. I thought I might pass out. She just stared at me, and I could feel my pulse racing in my ears. She knew I was there. She knew I was watching. Then, without a word, she slowly backed down the stairs, her eyes never leaving me. The basement door slammed shut behind her, and the house fell silent again. I should have left then. I should have turned around and walked back home. But I didn't. Something kept me rooted to the spot. It was like a mix of fear and curiosity, the feeling that I needed to know more, that I needed to understand what was going on with that house. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe it was the feeling of unfinished business. Whatever it was, I couldn't stop myself from going back the next night. The second time I went, the house was completely dark. No light flickered from the basement window, just emptiness. I stood in front of it, staring at the closed door, the darkness inside almost daring me to enter. My mind was racing, coming up with 1,000 different possibilities, each one worse than the last. My heart pounded in my chest, but I couldn't stop myself. My hand gripped the cold metal of the railing, and I pushed the door open. The smell hit me immediately, musty, like old wood and mildew, but something else, something metallic. It was subtle but unmistakable. It smelled like blood. I descended the stairs slowly, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The farther I went, the colder the air became. The basement stretched out in front of me, stretching into the blackness. I could barely see anything, but I could hear the sound, the dragging noise again. This time it was accompanied by soft, rhythmic thumping, as if someone was pacing back and forth in the dark. My heart was racing, my stomach twisted in knots, but I couldn't turn back now. I had to keep going. I had to see it for myself. I didn't realize how deep I'd gone until I reached the farthest corner of the basement. The air felt thick, like it was pressing in on me from all sides. The light from the hallway barely cut through the darkness, and I could hear my breath, loud and uneven. The thumping had stopped, but something felt off. The silence was oppressive, like the whole house was holding its breath. And then I heard it. A whisper, "Leave, leave now, it's not safe." I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. There was no one there, nothing, just more darkness. My gut twisted. I didn't need any more warning. I turned to leave, but as I reached the stairs, something cold and clammy brushed against my arm. I froze, my blood running cold, my heart hammered in my chest. I whipped around, my mind racing, but there was nothing there, only shadows. Then came the dragging sound again, closer, right behind me. I didn't think, I ran. My feet hit the stairs, one after the other, faster than I thought possible. I didn't stop until I was at the top, my heart racing, my lungs burning. And then I heard it, a voice, clear as day, right behind me. "Don't go. You don't know what's down here." I didn't need to hear anything else. I bolted. I didn't stop running until I was back on my front porch, gasping for breath, my hands trembling. I looked back at the house, but it was quiet again. No lights, no movement. It was just a house again, silent, unassuming. But I never went near that basement again. It was a Wednesday. I'll never forget that day because Thanksgiving was just around the corner, literally. The whole town felt like it was in overdrive. People rushing around, checking off their lists, preparing for the big family dinner, buying every last-minute item they could think of. It felt like the whole world was moving faster than usual. At that point, I had been working at the coffee shop for a few months and was desperate for some extra cash. So I picked up an extra shift. I figured I'd work a little harder to save up for college, which was coming up faster than I cared to admit. Senior year of high school was a blur, but I needed the money, so there I was, grinding away while everyone else seemed to be getting ready for the holiday rush. It wasn't even noon when I clocked out. I was tired, but it wasn't the kind of exhaustion that made me want to just go home and nap. I had enough energy to get a few things done. That's when my mom called. "Hey, can you swing by the market and grab a few things for dinner?" It wasn't much, but it was a few more things added to my already full to-do list. Still, it was a quick favor, and the store wasn't far, just 10 minutes away. So I agreed. I couldn't say no, not with Thanksgiving right around the corner, and her running the house practically solo. I expected a simple in-and-out trip, but when I pulled into the grocery store parking lot, I immediately realized it wasn't going to be that easy. The place was packed. Cars were everywhere, trying to get a spot, like some bizarre version of musical chairs. There were people circling, waiting for someone to leave, but the lot seemed like it had hit capacity. There were no spaces, not unless I wanted to park in the back corner and walk a mile to get inside. But after everything, I figured it wasn't worth the hassle. I found a spot near the edge of the lot and squeezed in. My car was small enough to fit, so I didn't mind. I grabbed my reusable bags and braced myself for what awaited me inside. When I stepped into the store, I couldn't believe how crazy it was. It was like a stampede. People were everywhere, grabbing carts and zipping down aisles, fighting for the last bags of potatoes or cans of cranberries. The sounds of carts clattering on the tile floor were deafening. There were elbows everywhere, people shoving past one another to get to the last package of frozen peas. It felt like some sort of dystopian food fight. I tried to stay calm and grab everything on my list as quickly as possible, but the crowd was relentless. It was like I couldn't move without bumping into someone or getting caught in the flow of shoppers pushing by. Finally, I made it to the checkout. The line stretched around the corner, and of course, the cashier seemed to be moving in slow motion. I could already feel the weight of the day creeping in, tired, frustrated, but still somehow determined to make it out alive. The person in front of me had a cart piled high with a mountain of stuff, and they were digging around trying to find their wallet. I checked the time. Almost an hour had passed since I grabbed my first item. It felt like a lifetime, but eventually I paid and hurried outside, hoping I could escape the madness. The parking lot was still chaotic, with people circling and honking their horns. I couldn't believe it was still this bad. Usually, by the time you load your bags into your car, the place starts to empty out. But not today. For some reason, it felt like I was in a bad dream that wouldn't end. I finally got everything packed into my car and sighed with relief. At least the worst was behind me. But then, of course, it wasn't. The drive home felt different. Usually, it's a peaceful 10-minute stretch, and I get to unwind after a busy shift. Today, though, the traffic was heavy, and everyone seemed to be in a rush, cutting each other off. It was like the whole world was in a hurry to get somewhere, and I was just trying to keep up. When I turned onto my street, I noticed a black sedan following me. It wasn't unusual for someone to be going in the same direction, but it was the way the car stayed just a little too close behind me. It was almost as though they were trying to make sure I didn't turn off until they knew where I was going. At first, I tried not to think too much about it. Maybe it was just someone headed in the same direction. But as I made my turn into the driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The black sedan followed me all the way down the block. And then, instead of driving by like I expected, it stopped behind me. It wasn't a quick stop either, like they were waiting. Waiting for what? I had no idea. The engine was running, but no one got out. No sign of any movement. It felt off. I stood there for a moment, grocery bags in hand, staring at the car. It was just an ordinary sedan, nothing special, but there was something about it that made my heart rate spike. I couldn't quite put it into words, but I felt watched. My stomach knotted up. I told myself it was probably just a neighbor needing to turn around or something, but I didn't feel reassured. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the car slowly backed up and drove away. It wasn't fast, but it wasn't slow either. It was as if the driver was in no real hurry. The moment the car disappeared down the street, a wave of relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The tension that had been building in my chest didn't just go away. It stayed there, like a heavy weight pressing down. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was nothing. I grabbed the grocery bags and went inside, trying to move on with the evening. But that unease stayed with me, lingering in the back of my mind. Inside, everything was normal. Mom was already busy in the kitchen, prepping for tomorrow. The air smelled of garlic and onions, the sound of chopping filling the room as she worked. It was all so domestic and calm. She was making the turkey, preparing the stuffing, getting everything ready for the family. I helped out here and there, but mostly I stayed out of the way, catching up on homework and scrolling through my phone. I tried to let the calm of the evening sink in, to forget about the strange encounter with the sedan. It was just my overactive imagination, right? We went to bed early that night. The next day was going to be full of cooking, family, and well, the usual holiday chaos. I was exhausted, and honestly, I was looking forward to just enjoying the day. But for some reason, I woke up much earlier than usual. It was barely 6 a.m., and the world outside was still shrouded in darkness. The feeling I had the night before hadn't gone away. It was like a low hum of unease vibrating under the surface. I couldn't shake it, no matter how hard I tried. I sat up in bed, rubbing my eyes, trying to figure out why I felt so strange. I couldn't even pinpoint what was off, just that something felt wrong. I got up and walked toward the window, pulled back the blinds just a little, and that's when I saw it. A car, parked directly in front of our house. The only one on the street. That was strange. People didn't park on the street in our neighborhood, not unless there was some kind of emergency. It wasn't normal. I couldn't see the details from my vantage point, but something about it felt wrong. I leaned closer to the window, trying to get a better look, and then I froze. It was the same black sedan from the night before. I couldn't believe it. My heart started to race. The car was empty, no sign of anyone inside, but I could feel the fear creeping up my spine. Something was off and my body knew it. My mind was racing. What was going on? Why was the car there? Why was it empty? Then I saw him. A man stepped out from the side of the house, his movements slow, careful. He was wearing a heavy jacket and a hat, but there was something about the way he moved that made me uneasy. He didn't seem like he wanted to be seen, but I saw him clearly enough. He walked toward the sedan, opened the door, and leaned inside for a long time. What was he doing? My mind was spinning, but it felt like my body knew something wasn't right. I couldn't take my eyes off him. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. He finally pulled something out of the car. A duffel bag, maybe? I couldn't tell exactly what it was, but I could feel the tension building. This was no ordinary trip to the car. This wasn't normal. Then he turned, slowly, methodically, and his eyes locked onto mine. In that moment, time seemed to stop. I could feel the blood rush out of my face, my stomach dropping. He saw me. He knew I was watching. I felt a surge of panic, my breath catching in my throat. I was frozen, completely paralyzed as I watched him. I had no idea what he was doing, what he wanted, but it was clear he wasn't supposed to be there. I jerked back from the window, panic flooding through me. My hands were shaking as I fumbled to pull the blinds shut. My mind was racing, my heart pounding. What did he want? What was in that bag? I felt completely exposed, trapped in that moment. I didn't move, didn't even breathe, just stood there, waiting for what felt like an eternity. Then I heard the car door slam shut. I dared to peek through the blinds again, just enough to see the sedan pulling away. It sped down the street, disappearing into the dark, and I was left standing there, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I couldn't sleep. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, but deep down I knew it wasn't. I'd seen something I couldn't unsee. The next morning, I told my parents everything. We checked the house, the yard, the street. There was no sign of anything unusual, no footprints, no damage, no evidence of a break-in. It was like the whole thing never happened. But that feeling, the one that wouldn't leave my chest, that was real, and I knew it. I never saw the black sedan again. I never saw that man again. It was a Tuesday night when I first noticed him. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I was 14, the kind of teenager who spent her weeknights sprawled out on the couch, half-heartedly scrolling through my phone and pretending to study for the next test I knew I wasn't going to do well on. You know how it goes. You're supposed to be reading, but you're just there, your mind drifting somewhere else. My mom was in the kitchen, probably cooking or cleaning up after dinner. Honestly, I wasn't paying much attention. My dad on the other side of the house was probably tinkering with some project at his workbench, making something that wasn't broken a little bit more perfect. The house was quiet, too quiet, and honestly, I thought nothing of it at first. Quiet nights were the norm in our place. Everything seemed frozen, like the world was just holding its breath. Then I saw the car. It wasn't like anything special at first, just a dull blue sedan, nothing that stood out from any other car. I wasn't even sure if I noticed it because it was out of place or because it just happened to be passing by at that exact moment. Cars always drove down our street, people driving home from work, maybe someone on their way to a late-night grocery run. But this one? It passed by once, slow and steady, no big deal, and then, to my surprise, it came back. It turned around and went down the street again. I didn't think much of it, but then it came around again a third time. Same car, same slow speed, no turning, no sudden stops. The kind of slow, deliberate driving that made me sit up and wonder. I wasn't sure why, but it made my stomach twist in a way I didn't like. I tried to ignore it at first. Maybe it was just someone lost. Maybe they were looking for a street. Maybe they didn't realize they passed it and just kept going around in circles. But the third time it passed by, I couldn't shake this strange feeling that something wasn't quite right. Like I had stumbled into a moment I wasn't supposed to be part of. I glanced over at my mom, who was humming to herself in the kitchen. She didn't seem bothered, but maybe I could ease my curiosity by asking her, "Hey Mom, who's "Who drives a blue sedan around here?" I called, not bothering to look up from my phone. She stuck her head out from the kitchen, her hands still wet from whatever she was doing, and gave me a distracted look. "Could be anyone," she said with a casual shrug. "Maybe a neighbor or someone visiting. No big deal." I didn't buy it. Something about that car didn't sit right with me. It wasn't that I thought it was a dangerous car, but I knew that feeling, the one in the pit of your stomach that tells you something is wrong. My mom didn't seem to notice, though. She went back to whatever she was doing without another thought. But I couldn't shake the feeling. Something about the way it moved, the way it turned around, kept me glued to that window. And then, just as I thought I had let it go, the car stopped, right across from my driveway. My heart seemed to skip a beat, and I swear I felt a shiver run down my spine. Why had it stopped? It didn't seem like it was just passing through anymore. It had deliberately come to a halt. And as I watched, I realized I was holding my breath. Was someone watching us? I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, though. I didn't want to be that kid who freaks out over nothing. So I walked over to where my dad was working on his endless project, sure that he'd laugh it off and tell me I was overreacting. I was still hoping for some kind of rational explanation that would make me feel better. But even as I walked down the hall, that knot in my stomach just wouldn't loosen. "Dad," I said, trying to sound casual, "I think there's someone in a blue sedan just sitting outside our house." He didn't seem to take me seriously at first. He chuckled a little, shaking his head as he worked with whatever small tool he had in his hand. "You're probably just seeing things, kid," he said, offering a reassuring grin. His nonchalant attitude helped, but it didn't make the feeling go away. It's funny how someone else's calmness can be so reassuring, yet so disconcerting at the same time. It made me feel a little better, I guess, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I couldn't explain it, but I could feel it, that weird sense of unease gnawing at me. After dinner, I ended up back in my spot in front of the window trying to distract myself with the TV, but the screen might as well have been blank for all I cared. My eyes kept drifting back to that same street, looking for any sign of the car. It wasn't there anymore, but that knot in my chest hadn't loosened. I couldn't get rid of the sense that something wasn't quite right. The night was still, too still, and I felt like I was waiting for something I couldn't understand. And then I saw him, the man. He wasn't walking in a normal, casual way like someone taking a nighttime stroll. No, this man was pacing. Back and forth, slow steps, like he was waiting for something, or someone. It was so odd, like he was caught in a pattern, repeating the same movement, never really settling. I could barely see his face. The streetlights were far enough away that it was hard to make out the details, but the way he moved was unsettling. He was tall, wearing dark clothes that seemed to blend into the shadows. He walked across the street in front of the blue sedan, then just stopped. He didn't look at the car. He didn't look at anything. He just stood there, unmoving. My pulse sped up. I leaned closer to the window, trying to get a better look, my heart hammering in my chest. What was he doing? Why was he just standing there? It didn't make sense. But before I could process anything more, I heard it. Clink. The back door rattled. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. It felt like everything in the house stopped, like the world outside was holding its breath. The sound was so loud, so distinct in the dead silence of the house. The handle twisted, and for a split second, I thought someone was trying to get inside. I stood there, frozen in place. I looked over at my mom, and she was standing still too, her eyes wide. She didn't move, didn't speak, she just stared at me. "Did someone go outside?" My dad's voice broke the tension. He didn't move either, but the question hung in the air. We all stood there, eyes darting between each other. No one had moved. We hadn't opened the door. My stomach dropped lower. That knot inside me tightened even more, and I felt my pulse quicken. Something was wrong. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my dad move toward the back door. He didn't say anything, didn't ask anyone if they wanted to come with him. He just cracked the curtain open slightly, whispering, "Someone's out there." His voice was tight, like he was trying to keep calm, but failing. Without waiting for anyone else to say anything, he unlocked the door and stepped outside. I could barely see him through the window, but I could see enough. He was moving fast now, purposeful, like he knew exactly what he was doing. "They're running," I whispered to myself, not really meaning to say it out loud. I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing, unsure whether I should stay inside or go out and follow him. I didn't even know if my dad was safe. I had no idea who this person was or what they wanted, but I couldn't just stay inside while someone was out there, creeping around in the dark. I stepped out into the cold air, shivering as the chill cut through my clothes. The night felt heavier now, like the air itself was holding something back. We spread out across the yard, walking slowly, eyes scanning every inch of the darkness, trying to find anything, any sign of movement. The yard was dark, too dark, and it was almost as if the shadows themselves were watching us. No one spoke. We were too aware of how quiet it was, how nothing moved. And then, from the corner of the yard, I saw him again. The figure. He moved just enough for me to notice, but before I could say anything, he disappeared into the dark. No rustling of leaves, no footsteps, no sound at all. Like he was swallowed by the shadows. Gone. We looked for a while longer, but it didn't feel right. The air was too heavy, too thick with something unspoken. The longer we stood there, the more the night felt wrong. The unease seeped into my bones. Eventually, we went back inside, still not sure what we'd seen, still not sure if we were being foolish or if something really had happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house felt colder now, quieter, like the world was holding its breath. The blue sedan never showed up again.